What if I told you that everything you believe about financial markets is a lie? You've been taught that markets rise because of things like investor confidence, strong company earnings, and a healthy economy. You've heard that stock prices are driven by fundamentals, rational valuation, and good old supply and demand. But what if the truth is far more uncomfortable? What if markets don't just move on their own? What if they are moved? The force that moves them isn't optimism or earnings reports. It's liquidity, the hidden oxygen of the entire global financial system. Liquidity is the ultimate decider. It determines who survives and who collapses, who gets bailed out and who gets sacrificed. Without it, nothing functions. Not banks, not hedge funds, not even governments. Every single night, while most of the world is sleeping, the giants of Wall Street enter a private auction for their survival. This is the repo market. It's a place where the largest financial institutions on earth bring the safest collateral ever created, U.S. Treasury bonds, and essentially beg to borrow cash overnight just to open for business the next day. There's only one rule in this arena. Whoever gets liquidity lives. Whoever doesn't, dies. We're talking about a staggering amount of money. More than $1.6 trillion flow through this hidden marketplace every single night. You'll never see a segment about it on CNBC. Your university economics professor probably never mentioned it. And the general public is kept completely in the dark. Why? Because if people truly understood how fragile this mechanism is, the entire illusion of market stability would shatter in an instant. On September 17, 2019, that illusion cracked. At 7:59 p.m., everything seemed normal. But by 8 p.m., the global financial system began to choke. The overnight repo rate, which normally sits quietly around 2%, suddenly detonated. It skyrocketed to 10% in just a few hours. Think about what that means. The biggest banks were offering the safest collateral on the planet, and still, nobody would lend them money. In a normal, functioning system, that should be mathematically impossible. But it happened, and it revealed a terrifying secret. The system's liquidity was drying up from the inside out. The official story was a collection of excuses, quarter-end adjustments, temporary imbalances, technical issues. But the Federal Reserve's reaction told the real story. They didn't wait. They didn't form a committee to investigate. They acted like firefighters rushing into a burning building. That very night, the Fed injected $53 billion into the system. The next day, it was $75 billion, and then another $75 billion per day for weeks. They weren't just rescuing the markets. They were performing emergency resuscitation on liquidity itself. Because without liquidity, there is no price discovery. And without price discovery, there is no market. Without a market, the illusion of trillions of dollars of wealth simply evaporates into thin air. Now, here is the part that nobody wants you to think about. This all happened before COVID. The system didn't break because of a pandemic. The pandemic became the perfect cover story, the perfect narrative to justify unprecedented money printing, quantitative easing, and endless emergency liquidity facilities, all without anyone asking the hard questions. The truth is much simpler and much darker. The financial system was already suffocating long before the world went into lockdown. When you finally understand that liquidity is the real oxygen of the markets, you start to see where the power truly lies. Power isn't in a stock price. Power is in the hands of the person who controls the valve, the one who decides when to release that oxygen and when to withhold it. This is precisely why, after the 2019 repo disaster, the Federal Reserve quietly created a new weapon, the standing repo facility. It's a permanent liquidity backstop, a silent backdoor, a kill switch. It's a mechanism that gives them the ultimate power to decide who gets saved and who gets sacrificed in the next crisis. If right now you feel like someone just opened a door to a world you were never meant to see, don't look away. You're on the right track. This one truth leads to another. And once you truly understand how liquidity moves the world, you will never see markets, money, or power the same way again. Don't stop now. They win when you stop asking questions. For over 100 years, we've been told a story. The market is free, supply and demand set the prices, and everyone plays by the same rules. But that's a myth. The real story isn't about stocks or Wall Street or even the dollar. It's about something far more powerful. Liquidity. Who controls it, who gets it, and who is left out to dry. Most people believe the Federal Reserve was created to stabilize the economy. That's the public relations version, the real version. The Fed was created to control liquidity for the benefit of the powerful. The brilliant banker J.P. Morgan knew it. The financiers who met in secret on Jekyll Island in 1910 knew it. And Wall Street has never forgotten it. The person who controls credit controls the country. Before the Fed, the market was brutally simple. If you made a bad bet, you collapsed. If you took on too much debt, you paid the price. There was no emergency safety net, no bailouts, no central bank to save you. During the Great Panic of 1907, J.P. Morgan himself took charge. He marched into the New York clearinghouse, locked the doors, and forced the nation's top bankers to pool their money and rescue the financial system. One man decided who lived and who died, financially speaking. This event terrified Congress, not because the system almost failed, but because a single private citizen held that much power. What would happen when he was gone? The country didn't need a central bank to protect you and me. It needed a central bank to protect Wall Street from itself. So, when the Federal Reserve Act was quietly passed in 1913, it wasn't the government taking control of banking. It was banking taking control of the government. The Fed became the institutional version of J.P. Morgan, with the authority to decide who gets the lifeblood of the economy. Because the power to print money is nothing compared to the power to decide who gets that money first. From that day forward, every major economic crisis has followed the same script. Too much risky leverage, a sudden liquidity crunch, and someone at the very top deciding who gets sacrificed. Look at the Great Depression. In 1929, as the stock market crashed, the Fed deliberately withheld liquidity to purge speculation. They didn't fail to act. Their inaction was a calculated move. They weaponized liquidity to teach a lesson, and those outside the inner circle paid the price. Fast forward to 1971. The U.S. could no longer back its dollars with gold. So President Nixon slammed the gold window shut. No warning, no public debate. Overnight, the entire global financial system was upended. The dollar was no longer money backed by a physical asset. It became a belief system. And what backs a belief system? Liquidity. Suddenly, America could borrow infinitely. It could print money without limit and export its inflation to the rest of the world. As long as everyone accepted dollars, the game could go on forever. The anchor used to be gold. Then it became the dollar. But now, the anchor is liquidity itself, the access to funding, collateral, and leverage. In the 1980s, Wall Street discovered the most profitable formula in history. Use leverage to inflate asset prices, take the profits, and repeat. But this formula requires constant funding. And when the system strained during the Black Monday crash of 1987, the Fed stepped in with one simple sentence: "We stand ready to provide liquidity." That single promise saved Wall Street trillions. Did any small business get that guarantee? Did any homeowner? No. Does this sound familiar? Every time the financial system stretched itself to the breaking point, one thing always saved it: liquidity. Back in 1998, a hedge fund called Long-Term Capital Management collapsed, threatening to drag the entire global financial system down with it. What did the Fed do? They orchestrated a rescue overnight. LTCM wasn't saved because it was a great company. It was saved because its failure would have killed liquidity. And if liquidity dies, everything built on it dies too. Fast forward to 2008. This was the moment the world realized the financial system wasn't really a market. It was a casino where the house made sure the dealers could never lose. Banks had leveraged the housing market beyond all sanity, bundled toxic mortgages into securities, bet against them, and then, when it all blew up, they begged for a bailout. And what happened? The Fed didn't punish them. They injected over $29 trillion in cumulative loans and guarantees into the system. They saved the very institutions that caused the crisis, while millions of families lost their homes. This is the key takeaway. Markets don't just move. They are moved. And after 2008, the rules of the game changed forever. The Fed discovered something powerful. Liquidity could create a bull market even when the real economy was struggling. Just pump in the liquidity. Watch asset prices rise, Wall Street cheers, and everyone forgets about the root cause of the problem. And so, the U.S. economy began its shift from being based on production to being dependent on liquidity. Productivity didn't matter anymore. Liquidity did. Corporate earnings? Nope. Liquidity. The market finding the true price of an asset? Forget about it. Liquidity was all that mattered. When money is free and liquidity is infinite, everything goes up. But when liquidity tightens, everything crashes. Sound familiar? Here's the catch. When you build a financial system that needs constant liquidity, you've created an addict. You can't just take the drug away without killing the patient. That's why every single attempt to return to normal policy after 2008 failed. The moment the Fed even hinted at raising interest rates or shrinking its balance sheet, the market started to crack. In late 2018, just the suggestion of tightening triggered a 20% market crash in a matter of weeks. Liquidity had become the only story that mattered. This brings us directly to where we left off in Part 1, the crisis of 2019. An overnight lending rate, the repo rate, suddenly spiked to 10%. This was a sign that the system's collateral, the very foundation of the liquidity engine, U.S. Treasuries, wasn't being trusted. Nothing terrifies Wall Street more than collateral being rejected. Because when collateral isn't accepted, liquidity freezes. When liquidity freezes, leverage implodes. And when leverage implodes, markets collapse. The Fed's rescue wasn't a choice. It was a reflex. Once the system is designed to depend on liquidity, liquidity must flow forever. And then COVID hit. Most people think COVID caused the Fed to print trillions of dollars. But insiders know the truth. COVID became the perfect excuse the Fed desperately needed. It was the justification, the narrative, for an unprecedented intervention. The system was already suffocating. COVID just made it socially acceptable to inject liquidity on a scale that would have been unthinkable just months before. Between March 2020 and March 2022, the Fed effectively doubled the money supply, creating nearly $5 trillion. And what happened? Asset prices soared, stocks soared, cryptocurrencies soared, everything soared, not because of fundamental value, but because liquidity was flowing everywhere. But here's the twist. Once liquidity becomes the only thing holding up the system itself becomes ungovernable. Because that liquidity has to go somewhere. It chases returns. It seeks out leverage. It hunts for the highest yield. And when one market stops delivering, that massive pool of liquidity sloshes over to another, creating new bubbles, distortions, and instability. But what happens when liquidity tries to exit the system entirely, when it no longer wants dollars but wants something real instead? We'll get to that. Because there's one more crucial evolution in this story. Historically, when a crisis hit, the Fed had a choice. It could decide whether or not to intervene. But after the 2019 repo crisis, Wall Street demanded a guarantee. No more uncertainty. They wanted a permanent fixture, a standing repo facility that would automatically inject liquidity whenever collateral was questioned, and that's exactly what they got. A permanent liquidity backstop, a shadow QE button, a silent bailout pipeline. It's the modern version of J.P. Morgan locking bankers in a room in 1907 to fix a crisis, except now the room is automated, invisible, and only accessible to the inner circle. The institutions the Fed chooses. Not you, not small businesses, not the real economy. The historical pattern is now complete. In 1907, one man controlled liquidity. By 1913, a central bank controlled it. In 2008, liquidity saved the system instead of the people. In 2019, the system nearly died without it. By 2020, infinite liquidity became normal. And in 2021, it became permanent. The public thinks the Fed controls money. Insiders know the Fed controls access to liquidity. And the ones who control that access decide everything. Who gets saved, who gets sacrificed, and when the whole cycle resets. The design is hidden in plain sight. The more complicated the liquidity system becomes, the easier it is to hide who truly benefits. In our next parts, we will expose that mechanism. We'll show you how a single treasury bond can be pledged over and over again, creating the illusion of abundant liquidity even when real collateral is scarce. We'll also reveal what happens when that collateral disappears entirely. Because when collateral disappears, liquidity disappears. And when liquidity disappears, the music stops. But before we go there, you need to understand one final truth. Liquidity isn't just money. Liquidity is permission. Permission to borrow, permission to trade, permission to survive. And who gets that permission reveals everything. For over a century, Wall Street lived on a knife's edge: crisis, bailout, repeat. Each time the system held its breath, waiting for the Federal Reserve to ride to the rescue. But after the repo market meltdown in 2019, waiting wasn't good enough anymore. It was too public, too political, too uncertain. Wall Street decided it didn't want a rescue. It wanted a guarantee. So they demanded a structural change, a mechanism that would make liquidity automatic, predictable, and silent. They wanted an emergency exit that only they had the key to, one they could use whenever the ground started to shake, without news headlines or political debate. And inside the Fed's headquarters, a plan was quietly drafted. They called it the Standing Repo Facility, or SRF, a permanent pipeline that would let major banks and financial players get all the cash they needed instantly, just by pledging some collateral. No press conferences, no congressional hearings, just a liquidity fire hose bolted directly into the plumbing of the financial system. Only a few insiders grasped the terrifying implication. This wasn't a rescue operation anymore. It was an entitlement. If the market is an addict, the SRF is the IV drip permanently taped to its arm, delivering a constant supply. But during the planning, a crucial question came up. Who gets access? The answer tells you everything you need to know. Not everyone, not even every bank. Access was granted only to primary dealers, the biggest players on Wall Street, and a select group of foreign central banks. Small community banks, the businesses on Main Street, the real economy, locked out. This wasn't about stabilizing the economy. It was about protecting the system's inner circle. Because in finance, access to liquidity isn't just power, it's survival. At the center of this monumental shift stood one man, Jerome Powell. Not a book-smart academic economist, but a former private equity deal-maker. Powell understands the real game isn't about economic theory, it's about control. When the repo crisis hit, he acted faster than any Fed chair in modern history. He didn't ask for permission, he just acted, flooding the system with billions of dollars overnight, and only explaining himself weeks later. He knew the market didn't need an explanation. It needed cash. So, behind closed doors, Powell and his team designed the SRF. Think about what that means. A mechanism that privatizes access to the public's money, giving a select few the ability to get unlimited cash instantly with no oversight. But they couldn't just announce it. They needed a distraction, a story so big it would provide the perfect cover. And in early 2020, they got one. A global pandemic, lockdowns, panic. While the world was glued to their screens watching case numbers, Powell quietly launched a financial revolution. In July 2021, the move was made. The Standing Repo Facility became permanent, not an emergency tool, not a temporary fix, a permanent feature of our financial system. The announcement? A single sentence buried deep inside a routine press release. No fanfare, no debate. A footnote that would forever change the balance of financial power. The media missed it. The public never knew it happened. But on Wall Street, everyone understood. The bailout was now built in. The Fed had given itself a button, a liquidity switch. If markets panicked, they could press it and flood the system with cash, anesthetizing the fear. The SRF isn't about preventing a collapse. It's about controlling when a collapse is allowed to happen. When you're the sole gatekeeper of liquidity, a market crash is no longer an accident. It becomes a strategic choice. Imagine a casino where the house can decide, at any moment, which players get more chips and which ones go bust. The Fed is now the house, It chooses who survives a crisis and who gets wiped out. And there's a hidden genius to the design. The SRF only accepts the best collateral: U.S. Treasuries and government-backed mortgage securities. This forces the entire financial system to constantly buy U.S. government debt. Why? Because holding that debt is now the only key to accessing the Fed's magic liquidity window. The more debt the government issues, the more collateral Wall Street has. The more collateral it has, the more leverage it can take on. The more leverage, the more fragile the system becomes. And that fragility creates total dependency on the one institution with the button, the Fed. They didn't fix the system. They engineered it to be dependent. But here is where the story takes a dark turn. The SRF solved one problem, the unpredictability of bailouts, but it created a much larger one. By making liquidity predictable, the Fed has given Wall Street a roadmap. If you know exactly when the fire hose will turn on, you know when asset prices will go up. Volatility is no longer a risk. It's a money-making opportunity for those in the know. The problem is, liquidity is a zero-sum game. For it to be given to someone, it must be taken from someone else. And beneath the surface, a new fragility is growing. A risk so fundamental that not even the SRF can stop it. It's not about interest rates, inflation, or recession. It's about collateral, the very foundation of this entire system. Because once the system runs out of good, trustworthy collateral, the liquidity machine grinds to a halt. And when liquidity dies, everything built on top of it dies too. In our next video, we'll uncover the secret Wall Street never talks about: collateral rehypothecation. We'll show you how a single bond can be promised to multiple lenders at the same time, creating the illusion of safety while the system is hollowed out from within. When you see how fragile the collateral itself has become, you'll understand why the next crisis won't be about price. It will be about trust. And when that disappears, the entire system freezes. That paper in your wallet, those digits in your bank account, that's just the surface. In the real financial system, the only thing that matters is collateral. Collateral is the key that unlocks liquidity. Liquidity unlocks leverage. And leverage creates unimaginable profits and power. If you control the collateral, you control the markets. And if you control the markets, you control everything. The system doesn't run on dollars. It runs on trust. And the most trusted object in the entire financial universe is a U.S. Treasury security. Why? Not because the government is smart or politicians are responsible. It's because the entire world believes the U.S. will always pay its debts. That belief makes treasuries the ultimate collateral. And this is where it gets interesting. Wall Street has a magic trick called rehypothecation. Think of it like this. I borrow your car. Without telling you, I make a copy of your key and lend the car to my friend. My friend copies the key again and lends it to someone else. On paper, 3 people believe they have access to the same car. In reality, there's only one. This is exactly how the repo market works. A single treasury bond can be promised as collateral in multiple deals at the same time. Each party believes they have a real claim to it. This illusion of ownership works perfectly, until it doesn't. Here's the shocking part. Research from the IMF shows that just $1 of top-tier collateral can support up to $50 of financial activity. Not $50 of value, $50 of leverage. The Bank of England has admitted that these collateral chains create massive multipliers. It's a system built on promises, stacked on top of other promises, all backed by collateral that might not actually be there if everyone asks for it back at once. When markets are calm, nobody notices. But when stress hits, everyone scrambles for the same single treasury bond. That's how liquidity instantly vanishes. That's how a crisis is born. Let's follow the journey of a single treasury bond. The US government issues debt. A big bank, like JP Morgan, buys it. But instead of locking it away, they lend it to a hedge fund in the repo market for cash. The bank then takes that same treasury and lends it out again to another institution. That institution might use it as collateral in a derivatives trade. At every step, the treasury isn't being sold, it's being reused. Every reuse multiplies liquidity, leverage, and the fragility of the entire system. We're talking about a market where, according to the New York Fed, around $1.6 trillion in repo transactions happen every single day. These aren't small numbers. They are the bedrock of modern finance. To prevent a total collapse, the Federal Reserve created something called the Standing Repo Facility. It's like an artificial heart for the financial system, ready to pump in up to $500 billion of emergency cash. But there's a catch. It only accepts treasuries as collateral. This creates a hierarchy of power. If you own treasuries, you have a golden ticket to instant cash from the Fed itself. If you own anything else, you're out of luck. That's why everyone, banks, hedge funds, even foreign governments, hoards treasuries. They aren't buying them for the yield. They're buying a liquidity passport. And this changes everything. Owning treasuries isn't about earning a safe return. It's about securing your access to the lifeblood of the financial system. Wall Street figured this out a long time ago. The more U.S. debt there is, the more collateral exists. The more collateral, the more leverage, and the more profit. This is why, when U.S. debt crossed an astronomical $35 trillion, nobody on Wall Street panicked. They celebrated. Because in the modern financial world, more debt means more collateral. And the system doesn't just tolerate debt, it desperately depends on it. Now, we arrive at its fragile beating heart. It all comes down to something called collateral, and specifically, U.S. treasuries. Think of it like this. When treasuries are plentiful and easily accessible, they act like a lubricant for the entire financial machine. Collateral chains expand, allowing banks and funds to lend and borrow more. This creates a surge in liquidity which fuels leverage, and as leverage grows, markets tend to rise. It's a virtuous cycle of expansion. But what happens when this lubricant runs dry? When treasuries become scarce? I don't mean scarce because the U.S. government stops issuing them. I mean scarce because they get locked away, taken out of circulation where they can't be used. When that happens, the entire process reverses. The collateral chains shrink, liquidity dries up, leverage unwinds, and markets fall. So, what could possibly lock away the world's most important financial asset? The answer might surprise you. The Federal Reserve's own balance sheet. Whenever you hear about the Fed doing quantitative easing, or QE, what's actually happening is they are buying massive amounts of treasuries. But those purchased treasuries don't just go into another active account. They disappear from the active financial system. They're moved into a digital vault on the Fed's balance sheet, where they become what's known as dead collateral. They're frozen. They can no longer be pledged, reused, or rehypothecated to create more liquidity. Essentially, every round of QE, while intended to stimulate the economy, simultaneously kills vital collateral chains. Conversely, when the Fed does quantitative tightening, or QT, it lets those treasuries mature or sells them, releasing them back into the wild. Every QT revives the collateral chains. This sheds new light on the market panic in 2022. When the Fed announced it was starting QT, the big players weren't panicking just because money was getting tighter. They were panicking because they knew precious collateral was about to re-enter circulation, and the system had become dangerously dependent on a lack of it. Let's look at the numbers. At its peak in 2022, the Fed's balance sheet hit a staggering $8.97 trillion. That's nearly $9 trillion of treasuries and mortgage-backed securities that were effectively removed from the collateral ecosystem. This created a massive collateral shortage. The engine was starving for fuel. So, what did the market do? It improvised. Hedge funds, in a desperate search for collateral, launched the largest basis trade in history. In simple terms, they used complex futures positions to create synthetic, or artificial, treasuries. They were essentially manufacturing their own collateral. The Bank for International Settlements, or BIS, reported on this in late 2023. They found that hedge funds had amassed up to $1.7 trillion in repo financing exposure tied to this trade. They were amplifying their leverage through hidden, off-balance sheet positions. The BIS warned that these trades could expose the financial system to stress through margin calls and forced deleveraging. What that really means is the collateral engine is stretched dangerously thin. We've reached a point where the same piece of collateral has been promised to so many different people that the only thing holding it all together is trust. And when that trust begins to falter, the entire chain can collapse in an instant. Here is the darkest secret of the system. If just a single link in that chain fails, everyone scrambles for the same piece of collateral at the exact same time. The moment one participant says, "Okay, show's over, I want my actual treasury back," the entire illusion shatters. This is precisely why the Fed created the Standing Repo Facility, or SRF. Most people think its purpose is to provide liquidity or cash in a crisis. That's not its primary function. Its real job is to prevent a collateral run, a panic where everyone tries to grab their collateral at once. But here's the final, terrifying twist. The system is rapidly approaching a point where no emergency facility, not even the SRF, can solve the fundamental problem. Because the system doesn't have a cash shortage, it has a collateral shortage. It lacks clean, unencumbered, high-quality collateral. And when collateral is scarce, liquidity cannot flow, no matter how much cash is available. This creates a bizarre second-order problem. Those who have access to the cleanest collateral gain almost total dominance over the market. A single humble treasury bill maturing in 1 month is now more valuable to the system than actual cash. How do we know this? Look at the yields. In late 2023, 1-month treasury bills were yielding 5.5%, while the Fed's overnight reverse repo rate, a proxy for the risk-free rate on cash, was paying 5.3%. In a normal market, that spread shouldn't exist. It's a glaring anomaly. It only exists for one reason. The demand for pristine collateral has become greater than the demand for cash itself. Collateral is becoming the new money. This leads us to the final critical mechanic. When collateral becomes money, a shortage of treasuries acts like monetary tightening. An abundance of collateral acts like monetary easing. The Fed is no longer just controlling the money supply, it's controlling the collateral supply. And this means the Fed isn't really controlling inflation through interest rates anymore. It's controlling liquidity and market stability through collateral eligibility, deciding what counts as good collateral and what doesn't. This explains the final piece of the puzzle. Why would the Federal Reserve seem to tolerate persistent inflation rather than risk collapsing the financial system? Because they can fight inflation. They know the playbook: raise rates, slow the economy. Markets will complain, but the plumbing of the system survives. They cannot, however, fight a full-blown collateral run. If inflation rises, the Fed raises rates. If collateral runs dry, repo rates spike to infinity, emergency facilities are overwhelmed, and blind panic spreads. In that scenario, prices don't just correct, they disappear. A market without liquidity isn't a market at all. It's a void. So, this brings us to the ultimate, sobering truth. The trigger for the next major crisis won't be interest rates. It won't be unemployment figures or inflation reports. It will be collateral. When the available collateral finally runs out, liquidity dies. When liquidity dies, the mountain of leverage built on top of it implodes. And when leverage implodes, markets collapse. We are now approaching the event that even the Fed's emergency backstops cannot stop. It's the moment when a treasury has been pledged and repledged so many times that someone finally demands to see the real thing. It's like everyone having a copy of a car key, but suddenly discovering the car itself is gone. That moment will instantly reveal who holds real, tangible collateral, and who is only holding a paper claim to it. The great illusion of modern finance ends when someone reaches for the collateral and discovers nothing is there. And the terrifying part is, Wall Street knows exactly when that moment is coming. Everyone thinks a financial crisis starts with panic. You picture flashing red screens, collapsing stock charts, and fear gripping the market. But that's not where it begins. That's just the final public act. The real crisis starts much earlier, silently, in a part of the financial system you rarely hear about. It starts with collateral. Long before the average person starts to worry, long before the news headlines scream crash, Long before the Federal Reserve even admits there's a problem, the engine of the entire financial system begins to sputter. What is this engine? It's the market for collateral. It's a hidden world where things like U.S. Treasury bonds are used as a kind of financial passport, allowing banks and hedge funds to borrow massive amounts of money overnight, every single night. Normally, this process is smooth, almost invisible. But when a crisis is brewing, the first signs appear here. A Treasury bond that was easily accepted for a loan yesterday suddenly needs a bigger discount today. A lender, feeling nervous, demands what S called a haircut. They'll lend you less money for the same piece of collateral. A borrower is abruptly asked to post more collateral to back the same loan they had yesterday. None of this makes the evening news. You won't see it on CNBC. It happens in the shadows of finance, in the complex plumbing that connects all the major players. But for those inside the system, every alarm bell is already ringing. A squeeze on collateral isn't loud and explosive like a stock market crash. It's quiet. It's surgical. It's a slow, creeping paralysis. Because when the quality of collateral is questioned, the flow of money, liquidity, stops. And when liquidity stops, prices don't just fall. They vanish. The market stops functioning. For years, the entire system has been running on a belief as fragile as glass, the assumption that anyone who needs collateral to borrow will always be able to get it. But right now, that belief is cracking. The Federal Reserve is trying to shrink its massive balance sheet, which means it's pulling valuable collateral out of the system. At the same time, Wall Street's leverage is higher than it has been at any point since the 2008 crisis. Hedge funds have built enormous, risky positions, all financed by this fragile overnight borrowing system. And then there's the private credit market, lending that happens outside the regulated banking system. It has exploded to over $2.1 trillion. Think of it as a massive, unregulated financial world with no safety net. Meanwhile, the U.S. federal debt just passed $35 trillion. Why so much debt? Because the system needs it. The government has to keep creating more and more treasury bonds, more collateral, just to keep the machine running. But there's a problem. Foreign countries, once eager buyers of U.S. debt, are slowing down their purchases. This forces the U.S. Treasury to issue more short-term bills, desperately trying to pump liquidity into a system that's gasping for air. These aren't just random data points. They are signs of immense strain. They show a system that needs more oxygen than ever, but has fewer lungs to breathe with. The next crisis won't look like the last one. It won't be about bad home loans or sloppy risk management. It will be triggered by one simple, devastating event. Someone important will ask for their collateral back, and the borrower won't have it. That single moment will be the spark. It will reveal the dirty secret of modern finance, that the same piece of collateral has been promised, or rehypothecated, to multiple lenders at the same time. It will expose the terrifying architecture of hidden leverage built beneath our seemingly stable markets. It will prove that the entire liquidity engine was never designed to be transparent. It was designed to be opaque, and once that happens, the trust that holds everything together will shatter. Suddenly, everyone will demand their collateral back at the same time. Only a tiny few will get it. Everyone else will be met with silence. In that moment of chaos, the Federal Reserve will face a stark choice: protect the system or protect the public. But if history is any guide, the choice has already been made. They will save the plumbing. They will save the big banks. They will save the flow of liquidity between the major financial institutions. They will not save individuals. They will not save the real economy. And they certainly won't save the people who trusted that the system was fair. The Fed doesn't protect the players in the game. It protects the game itself. When confidence finally breaks, the story will change overnight. Pundits on TV will say, "No one could have seen this coming." But they're wrong. You did. Because now you see the truth. You see that markets don't just move on their own. They are moved by powerful forces. You see that liquidity isn't just money. It's permission to operate in the system. You see that the real power isn't in setting prices, but in controlling the collateral that unlocks liquidity. And most importantly, you now see that the people who control the flow of liquidity get to decide who wins and who loses. There is one final brutal truth. The system isn't broken. It works perfectly for the people it was designed to serve. When the Fed floods the market with liquidity, the elite institutions use that cheap money to extract massive profits. When liquidity dries up and markets crash, those same institutions use their cash to buy up valuable assets for pennies on the dollar. For them, it's a win-win. Abundant liquidity gives them upside profits. Scarcity and crisis give them ownership of real assets. Everyone else just gets volatility. Everyone else gets told to stay calm and ride out the storm. Power is never about what they show you on the financial news. It has always been about what they hide in the plumbing. But you are not powerless in this. Information is your leverage. Awareness is your own form of liquidity. When you understand the mechanics of the system, you stop being manipulated by the official narrative. When you know how liquidity really moves, you stop reacting emotionally to every market swing. Once you've seen the plumbing, you can finally see the truth. If you feel something shifting inside you right now, if you feel like your old view of the markets no longer makes sense, that means you've crossed a threshold. You no longer see markets as random or unpredictable. You see them as engineered, and once you see the design, you can never go back to blissful ignorance. If the system fears anything, it isn't a market crash. It's awareness. It's people like you looking behind the curtain. So keep watching, keep learning, because the moment you stop paying attention is the moment they win. The further you go down this path, the more you'll understand that this story isn't just about finance. It's about power. And now, you can finally see it. Thanks for watching. If this opened your eyes, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're just getting started.